It's a cold, gloomy day here, so let's talk about some books. I'm going to attempt today to be one of those really cool YouTubers that film their video with like very few cuts. That's probably not going to happen. I'm probably going to cut it right after I say this. Anyway, I'm going to discuss today what I have finished reading, what I'm currently reading, and yeah, I think that's it. So let me just jump right into it. The first book that I finished, and I think I finished 3 books in the last week. Don't know how I did that. Probably because some of them I had already started. But the first one I'm going to talk about is Drood. I did finally finish this. This book was on my 24 books to read in 2024 list, as well as a whole bunch of other lists, and kept coming up all year long. I finally finished this huge chunker. It is technically not a mammoth. Yeah, it's technically not a mammoth. It's under 800 pages, just barely, because it's like 670. Anyway, Drood is written by Dan Simmons, and it tells the story of the last few years of Charles Dickens' life as narrated by his sometimes friend slash rival, Wilkie Collins, both real historical authors from the Victorian period. And the way this story is told is partially sort of a memoir slash story of my friend's life slash horror. It is a very fascinating tale. I would say that this book is perfect for those who love Victorian writing, particularly Charles Dickens and Wilkie Collins's work, because you're going to hear a lot about each of these authors, aspects of their lives, some true, some just sort of fictionalized to move the plot along. And you are going to hear a lot about their works, a lot about their works, as in probably more than you wanted to know if you were interested in reading their works. So I've been asked numerous times which books you should read before you read this book. I would say for sure there's a few books by Charles Dickens that you should read before you read this one. There are also a few books by Wilkie Collins that you should read before you read this book. And by a few, I mean a lot. And I will put all of them up here on the screen if I can with me. And I will also list them in the description box below. I think if you are the type of person who does not like books to be spoiled by you, this book will do it. I mean, it will tell you the main plot point and it will talk about the book for 3 pages on end and in detail. So if you don't want that with one of those works, don't read this book until you've read those books. I did that and I thoroughly appreciated it. There were a lot of like sort of Easter egg moments in here, but in its own right, even if you don't read those books, you're just going to hear more about them that may encourage you to read those books. I don't think you have to read those books before reading this one. The story in here definitely stands up on its own. And yeah, it was so fascinating to kind of follow along these 2 authors that I've read works by to get hints of their lives that I have heard before. It definitely made me want to read like more biographies about them so that I can sort of splice out what actually happened in their lives. But I did hear like some rumors and different ideas of what they were like and things that happened in their lives. So it was interesting to have it in sort of a more story form. That said, the whole horror story side of it was like completely made up, but thoroughly enjoyable and partially believable in some ways as well. It got into both the authors' relationships with one another, as well as just their own situations and dramas and things they were going through. And it set all of it in the time period of when they were writing some of the most major works of their careers and lives. So I really enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 4 stars. Again, it's something that I would recommend to anyone who's a fan of Charles Dickens and or Wilkie Collins. Though be warned, if you have trouble with like authors versus their art and not always liking when the authors aren't the greatest people, you may not want to read this because you may want to continue to like those authors because they are not portrayed here as likable people. I think Dan Simmons does do a good job of representing them pretty closely to how history um, makes them out to be. So that is Drood. I was really happy to read it. I was not disappointed with it. I'm very glad that I read all of the books by Charles Dickens and Wilkie Collins before I did, because I would have been bothered by the amount of spoilers in here. And they did just make this story all come together. So thank you to whoever that bookstore owner was who recommended this to me ages ago. I bet she has no idea the rabbit trail it led to. All right, yeah, reminding myself that I'm not cutting anything out of this video, though I will do some editing to like maybe enhance it. All right, the next book that I have that I'm going to talk about is The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. I listened to the audiobook of this and I did finish it, mostly because I mistakenly listened to the abridged audiobook version of this. And I was devastated by that once I figured it out 2 hours in. Because I realized that left me in an awkward place in the audiobook. I was 2 hours into the abridged version. The abridged version was only 4.5 hours long instead of the 26 hours that the whole book normally is. And so I was like, that means I'm halfway through the story. And I just couldn't figure out a great way of recovering that. I could have reread the first half of the book. I could have gone and restarted the audiobook and put those 2 hours to waste. I decided to just go ahead and go with it. I have read The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay before, back when I was in high school. I probably would have given it a 5-star read at the time, and I was really just wanting to reread the story right now in anticipation of going to see the opera. So I ended up deciding, you know what, those 2 hours are good enough. I'm just going to finish the audiobook, and I did. So The Amazing Adventures of Kavalier and Clay, I should say, are about two cousins, Joe Kavalier, right? What were their names? Here's where it becomes awkward to not make cuts. Yeah, Joe Kavalier and Sammy Clay, and they're cousins. Sammy Clay has lived and grown up in New York City. Joe has come across the world from a war-torn World War II era Europe to basically restart his life in the US as an immigrant. It gets into the situation of immigrants at that time, a little bit of historically what was going on in World War II, but the vast majority of the focus of this novel has to do with them trying to sort of do a rags to riches life in the comic book industry. Now, where the book goes from there, it's hard to say because my copy was so abridged that at times I had a hard time even following the plot of this story. It interspersed moments from the comic books they were writing, I guess, with moments from their lives. I think it was trying to make parallels between the two. Maybe. I don't know. It was that aspect was fairly confusing. But despite that, I did enjoy it. I ended up giving the audiobook 4 stars as an abridged audiobook. I think I probably would have given this book 5 stars if I had listened to the complete audiobook or if I had have reread it. Again, coulda, woulda, shoulda, but that's what I did and that's what I gave it. All right, let's keep moving here. I also read the New York trilogy by Paul Auster. That's a lie. I didn't read the whole trilogy. I read the first book in this trilogy, which is City of Glass. This is a book that I was reading for a local book club that I'm in. We are, for the book club, actually supposed to read all 3 books in here. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I need to look up and see when the book club meets. I really hope it wasn't yesterday. Oh my gosh. Anyway, let me talk about how this story went. So I read the first book in here, City of Glass, and they do have on the cover all 3 books that are in here. There's also Ghost and Locked Room. So I read the one that's pictured here. And City of Glass, what is this about? City of Glass is about a guy named, what is his name? Quinn, that's right. And I'll explain why I'm confused about what his name is. Because he is an author who has one book and has then written a lot of poetry under various pseudonyms, but his name is supposedly Quinn. And he gets a strange phone call one day that leads him on this detective mystery because he has written and become very popular for his like pulp detective fiction series. But the people who call him to help him solve their case, if you will, think he's Paul Auster. Yes, Paul Auster, the author of the book's name. What ensues is a weird mystery that I'm not sure is a mystery other than that it's mysterious to Quinn himself. I'm confused and found myself finding that the real mystery is what is everybody's name? Because Quinn goes by Quinn, Paul Auster, and at least 2 other names in the book. And there are a lot of different names in this book, even though there's probably really only 4 or 5 characters in the book itself. It was a winding, twisting story of following people around winding, twisting paths of New York City, pictured here on the back, that also had some strange ideas about religion and religious beliefs, got a little bit into child abuse, and was just an oddball story. Now, should I be surprised by this? Not really, because the book club that I'm reading this for is called Weird Fiction. This was weird fiction. That's all I can say about it. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I felt like there were moments where I was entertained and I was finding it interesting, and then there were moments where I was just like, where is this going and why? And in the end, I had no idea where it went. Like, I'm finding that this is another book. The other one that I read for this book club is Wasp Factory, that I feel like I need to go to the book club just to talk to somebody about this and hear what somebody else had to think. The downside of this being a trilogy of books is that after reading the first book, I really didn't like it that much, and I'm not really sure that I want to read the next two. The first book, City of Glass, in here was 130 pages long, and the last 30 pages of it, no joke, I had to read 10 minutes at a time because that's all I could do. I'm sorry, not 10 minutes at a time, 10 pages at a time. I would sit down and I would make myself read 10 pages, and I would go, okay, now I can get a break and a reward. And then when I feel like it, I'll come back and read another 10 pages. Sad, I know. The whole book, all 3 stories, is only 308 pages. I could have finished it by now, but that's basically where I'm at. Is I don't know if I want to. So the second story in here is only 30 pages long. So in theory, I could finish that one, and I feel like I should. And I should say that the book club is nice enough that like people come sometimes without having finished the book, and like everybody's fine with that. They'll usually explain why and whatever and talk about whatever they've read. So I do feel like, well, maybe I could read the second story. So at least I'd be able to talk about 2/3 of it, but I just don't know if I can do another 30 pages, which has me concerned because I also own 4321 by Paul Auster, and now it's making me really not want to read that book either. So I don't know. Hopefully, I haven't missed the book club and I'll be able to go to that and like process what I just read. And maybe I'll come back and finish those other 2 stories afterwards, or just move on to 4321, or just DNF Paul Auster as an author altogether. We'll see. All right, that gets me into what I am currently reading, and I'm actually going to start with 2 books that I feel like I really haven't talked about in a while, but are kind of ongoing reads for me. One of them is Year of Wonder. I forgot to bring it over here, so I will insert a picture of it on the screen. And this is a book that I have been working through, I believe, since July. And I have a little group for it on my Discord page, which I'll link in the description box below, where we just every week we discuss the music we've listened to. The whole book is just a page a day classical music where it gives you a piece of classical music to listen to, who the composer is, and then a 1-page blurb about the composer, their life, and maybe the song itself. And this has been a really good time. We've been having an amazing time just listening to it. If you'd like to join us on Discord, you're welcome to do this. It's a book that's really easy to pick up and put down. And all we do is once a week, and we check in and share what our favorite piece was from that week and why, or any connections. And then once a month, we do our favorite piece of the month. I am also creating a whole playlist of my favorite music that I have listened to from this book, and I will list that in the description box below. And one of the most delightful things that has come out of reading this and going through this book is that I'm getting a better idea of like what time period I really like. Baroque music is what I'm discovering. What instruments I really like in my music, piano and cello. And also, it's giving me an amazing playlist to enjoy during times where I just want to listen to something else. Because it turns out I also like my classical music to be like very calming, uplifting, and beautiful. And so I had a great time this past week on a trip I went on, driving through central New York in the middle of fall, listening to every piece of music that was on my playlist, and I absolutely loved it. That said, I'm finding so far in November that even the author of the book has acknowledged she's been picking a lot of pieces in minor keys that are kind of moody. And I'm finding for me, it's just feeling kind of meh and moody. I feel like a lot of the songs that she's been picking are like songs of seasonal depression. And I do mean of seasonal depression, not songs for seasonal depression. Like this is the playlist in November that you make when you're feeling seasonally depressed, not when you're trying to come out of it. So I'm hoping that since in today's piece she acknowledged that that was kind of what was happening with the music, that it will change and we'll go into some more upbeat music, but I don't know. We'll see. It's nice to be exposed to a variety of things, but that's what's been going on with Year of Wonder. The other book that I have been still working through is The Mysteries of Paris. Let me see if I can grab it here. Sneak peek of other things coming up. And The Mysteries of Paris is a buddy read that I've been doing with Stormy at Storm Reads. We have been making our way through this, almost 1,400 page book, and we are so close to the end. We have really been enjoying this read for the most part. I would definitely say at this point, like, I'm pretty sure that this book is, well, I know for a fact this book is not going to be a 5-star read for me. Whether it ends up as a 3 or a 4-star, it's hard to say. The structure of this book is it was serialized. So even though it's bound up as one book now, it is in here broken up into what are called 10 different books. And each book in here is made up of a series of chapters. So our goal since we started this is to read one book in here a month, which will contain anywhere from 10 to 16 chapters. And none of it's long because it was serialized, it was published in a paper. So I would say like a chapter is long if it's 10 pages. So typically we're getting about 100 to 120 pages of this read each month. It's very, very doable. Stormy and I, for the most part, have just been reading one chapter a day. But because there's only like 16 chapters total, there is like wiggle room that if we like miss a day, we can make up later. So right now we are in chapter 10, or we are in book 10 out of 12. We should be on chapter 14 as of today. I'm only on chapter 10, so I need to do a little catching up, or at least just keep reading. And yeah, this month we are finding ourselves in the Poor People's Hospital. Last month it was in the prison. And I have to say, so far, being in the hospital is way better than being in prison. That's probably true in general. But the prison book in here was so tedious to read through. We are finding as we go through this book more and more and more that Eugene Sue is really moving more further and further away from the actual plot and story of the book and more into essays on different like social justice issues he wants to talk about. At the beginning of the book, he was integrating the two together more, as well as just getting some general themes across. But as it goes on, like, I feel like I would say he's going from feeling more like Charles Dickens or Victor Hugo or Alexander Dumas to moving more towards Tolstoy and War and Peace, where it's like there's two separate things going on here. There's the story that you're telling, and then we're occasionally getting essays. However, Tolstoy's a much better writer. So yeah, so the thoughts are still resting on the rack as to whether or not this is a book that I would highly recommend. I would definitely not recommend it to everyone, but we still have the rest of book 10 to go, book 11, and then the epilogue. So we will finish this by the end of the year, I am sure. Partially just because I think at this point we really want to. But that's a little update on the Mysteries of Paris for you because, again, I don't feel like I've talked about it a lot recently. So there you go. Other books that I'm currently still reading, I did start The Lacuna by Barbara Kingsolver. I have read Pigs in Heaven and The Bean Trees by Barbara Kingsolver, but back when they first came out. So I have not read a book by Barbara Kingsolver in a very long time. I do find it ironic that I'm reading The Lacuna when Demon Copperhead, which is right here on my cart that you guys are sitting on, is like one of the books that I've most been anticipating for the last 2 years. Whatever, this is the book that I started first. How do I feel about The Lacuna? At this point, I'm most of the way through the book. And I have to say, I spent the first like third to almost half of the book feeling super misled. And that is nobody's fault but whoever wrote the blurb on the back of this edition of the book. This book was pretty much described as being about Harrison Shepherd living in the household of Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo and just sort of the revolutionary interactions he ends up like having through living in their household. That's not what this book is about. Like that's not how I would summarize it at all. And in fact, Alex, who I'm reading this with, has a more up to date version of this book, or at least it seems like it. Like our covers are different, and she has French flaps, and I don't. I don't know. But the description on hers, I think, is much more accurate. Basically, this story tells the story of Harrison Shepherd throughout his lifetime, and it is a story that whose themes discuss the ideas of identity, family, where home truly can be found, as well as mixes in a lot of historical fiction, including Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, communism, the whole like sort of Red Scare era in the US and around the world, and where that started and how that went. And yeah, just so much more than what the back of my book led me to believe. But what ended up happening was I was so stuck on what the back of my book said that I was trying to figure out where the book was going at the first half. It is structured in that it is a series of diaries and notes and reports and letters that are accumulated by Harrison Shepherd and the mysterious archivist VB. And yeah, it's going well. It hasn't been the most like gripping book. I definitely find myself reading it sometimes and feeling like sections are a little bit of a slog, but I am motivated to still finish it. I do want to know what's going to happen in the end, and there's still a few like problems or questions that have come up in the book that I'm waiting to have resolved. The final book that I have read this month, or that I'm listening to or working on reading right now, I guess that's what it is. What I'm currently reading, the final book that I'm currently reading, there we go, is Augustown by Kei Miller. And I have started this book on audiobook, which I did want to pause and talk about because one of the other issues I've been having this month, other than being misled or bored or confused by my books, is I'm finding audiobooks are not working for me this month. Now, I'm not talking about the Adventures of Kavalier and Clay. That worked pretty well for me as an audiobook, and the abridged part was my mistake. But after finishing that audiobook, I looked for another audiobook to start because I was like having I always like having two books rather going at the same time, usually an audiobook and a physical read. And the reason I do that is because I can then listen to an audiobook while I'm driving around running errands, or if I have a long drive somewhere, or if I'm waiting somewhere, or while I'm cleaning around the house and that kind of stuff. I can still be enjoying a book. This month, however, I've had a really hard time finding an audiobook that will work for me. And by working for me, I mean one that I can listen to and actually continue to listen to, as in it doesn't just become white noise in the background, or one that I can listen to that doesn't feel like it's being dragged out or is boring me or putting me to sleep or whatever. I don't know why. I don't know if it's me. I don't know if it's the audiobooks I've been trying. I don't know if I'm just really starting to realize I really just don't listen closely to audiobooks when they're on. I don't know. But I've been listening to Augustown on audiobook and it's going okay. I am listening to it on one time speed, which can be very slow, is for me way slower than I would actually read the book. And so can kind of make the story feel like it's dragging out, but it gives me something to read and listen to that is at least interesting while I'm, for instance, going for a long walk. Especially since I'm just walking through my neighborhood, so there's nothing particularly pretty or interesting to listen to. I mean, it's not like it's an ugly neighborhood that I listen to with horrible noises, but I think you know what I mean. It's just neighborhood sounds and sights. So Augustown is telling the story of Ma Taffy, and that's all I know so far. I really haven't made it that far into the audiobook or the book itself. I'm definitely still in the exposition and trying to figure out like what's going on. She lives in Jamaica. She's been horribly maimed in a household accident and is now blind. And she's definitely a major community figure. And right now, I feel like the ground is still being set in terms of talking about like what her neighborhood is like and what it's like to live there, how there is policing going on, but not policing that's really helping the people in the neighborhood. It's more policing that's helpful to the wealthy people outside the neighborhood, and making them feel more secure. And just kind of how she navigates all these things and helps the people around her, including her grandson, which I don't think is actually her grandson. And see, this is what I mean from the audiobook. Like, there's a part of me that feels like, yeah, I'm just listening to this right now, but when I finally get to finish a couple of these other books and get to this one, I might also just sit down and reread it from the start, which then makes me feel like, was my listening to it on audiobook a waste of time? I don't know. I'll let you know in another weekly reading wrap up how that went. So that's it for today. Those are all the books that I have finished and that I'm currently reading. I do feel like overall, November is a much better reading month than I've had in a while. I feel like I've been able to consistently sit down and read, that I've been enjoying for the most part what I'm reading, and that I'm not hitting any major roadblocks or interruptions or whatever. So let me know what you are currently reading and how your reading's going, and if you have the same issues with audiobooks. And I will talk to you next time. Bye.